commencement speaker.
Sarayim Tovim, good afternoon. It gives me distinct pleasure to introduce our Pulitzer Prize winning graduation speaker today, Michael Sheyban, who was born in 1963 in Washington, D.C. He studied at Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh, and he received an MFA in creative writing at UC Irvine. Since 1997, Michael has been living with his wife, Ayelet Waldman, also a very, very famous novelist, and their children in Berkeley. I imagine you tell them good stories every night before they go to sleep. Michael Sheyban's first novel, The Mysteries of Pittsburgh, was originally written for his master's thesis at UC Irvine and became a New York Times bestseller. His second novel, Wonder Boys, was also a bestseller and was made into a critically acclaimed movie. Sheyban's third novel, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, was selected by the American Library Association as one of the notable books of 2000 and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the PEN/Faulkner Award, and the LA Times Book Prize. It won the New York Society Library Prize for Fiction, the Bay Area Book Reviewers Award, the Commonwealth Club Gold Medal, and the Pulitzer Prize. But he has assured me that his speech here today and the degree that he will receive definitely mark the apex of your life. He is also the author of 2 collections of short stories, A Model World and Other Stories, Werewolves in Their Youth. He has authored a young adult novel, Summerland, a children's book, The Astonishing Secret of Awesome Man, every one to critical acclaim. He also edited the Best American Short Stories of 2005. For many of us, his novel, The Yiddish Policeman's Union, a hard-boiled detective novel set in an alternative world where Israel failed to be born and millions of European Jewish refugees took shelter in Alaska, became a New York Times bestseller, and was nominated for an Edgar Award, among others. His novel, Moonglow, was awarded the Gold Medal for Fiction by the Commonwealth Club of California's 86th Annual California Book Awards. He has also edited, with Ayelet Waldman, Kingdom of Olives and Ash, Writers Confront the Occupation, a book of particular relevance on this day as the United States moves its embassy to Jerusalem. A book of essays about 50 years of Israeli occupation in Palestine. His new book is a collection of essays about fatherhood entitled Pops, Fatherhood in Pieces, HarperCollins, May 2018. The list goes on and on. Just note that he was also voted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. It is a great honor for me as the acting president, interim president of the College Institute, to welcome such a distinguished novelist and moral voice to address you, our graduates and their families today on your graduation. Michael.
Thank you. Hello, thank you. First thing I want to say is a big mazel tov to the graduates. I can feel the kvelling in the room. I could hear the nachas being shept madly. Congratulations. I also want to say, it's in a great Jewish tradition exemplified by the glass that is broken at a wedding ceremony and the salt water representing tears that we dip parsley into at a Passover Seder, that I also wanted to express my condolences to the community here for the loss of Rabbi Pankin. I've heard a lot about him today since I arrived, and I'm really sorry that I did not have the opportunity to come to know him. I just wanted to tell you start with a little episode that happened in the life of my family. My wife and I spat into a couple little plastic vials and sent them off for DNA analysis. We were curious and apprehensive to hear the tale of our genetic inheritance. markers for certain diseases and disorders, for intolerance to certain drugs, for aversion to cilantro, or the smell of asparagus pea. I'm not making this up. In the matter of our ancestry, however, apart from slight uneasiness at the prospect of discovering that we were like third cousins, there was not a whole lot of suspense. My results came back with a small ancestral non-surprise in the form of one non-Jewish Eastern European around the 17th century. There was one puzzling Brit from about a century before that, and on my father's side, no earlier than 1690, a beautifully inexplicable sub-Saharan African. For my wife, however, as with the mythical turtles of Eastern cosmology, it was Ashkenazim all the way down. Like our parents, grandparents, and many times great-grandparents before us, in other words, my wife and I married in. Leaving aside the minor consideration of my having fallen in love with her at first sight, marrying in was, on the face of it, a strange thing for me to have done. I abhor homogeneity and insularity, exclusion and segregation, the redlining of neighborhoods, the erection of border walls and separation barriers. I am for mongrels and hybrids and creoles, for syncretism and confluence, for jazz and Afrobeat and Thai surf music, for integrated neighborhoods and open borders, and the preposterous history of Barack Obama. I'm for the hodgepodge cuisines of seaports and crossroads, for sampling and mashups, pastiche and collage. I'm for ambiguity, ambivalence, fluidity, muddle, complexity, diversity, creative balagan. Even when it comes to my own psyche, the only emotions I really trust are mixed emotions. I ply my craft in English, that most magnificent of creoles, and my personal house of language is haunted by the Dybbuk of Yiddish, that most humble and sly of creoles. Monocultural places, one language, one religion, one haplotype, make me profoundly uncomfortable, whether they're found inside or beyond the ghetto walls. An endogamous marriage is a ghetto of two. As the traditional Jewish wedding ritual makes explicit, it draws a circle around the married couple, inscribes them and any eventual children who come along within a figurative wall of tradition. Sorry, I knew it was going to happen. Didn't bring a bobby pin. It inscribes them within a figurative wall of tradition, custom, shared history, and a common inheritance of chromosomes and culture. I know that ghetto is a loaded word, and to the extent that one makes the choice to marry in free of any fear of paying the price of an exogamous marriage in shame, ostracism, or worse, maybe a kinder or more charitable word would be enclave. But you know what? I abhor an enclave, too. A gated community, a restricted country club, or a clutch of 800 zealots lodged in illusory safety behind a wall made from the bodies of teenage soldiers, gazing out in scorn and lordly alarm at the surrounding 200,000 residents of the city of Hebron, who are manifestly, for this is the fundamental purpose of all walls, other, and therefore, so goes the logic of the deepest, oldest human evil, less truly human. We tend to draw a distinction between walls that protect and walls that imprison. But that is only the same dark logic, again, justifying itself, as always, in the name of security. Security is an invention of humanity's jailers. Anywhere you look, it is and has always been the hand of power drawing the boundaries, putting up the separation barriers, and propagandizing hatred and fear of the people on the other side of the wall. Security for some means imprisonment for all. Jews walled up inside Venice's historic ghetto suffered less from pogrom and everyday persecution than Jews of the surrounding Veneto. And I've never seen a sorrier and more riotous group of convicts than the Jews of present-day Hebron. As for Judaism itself, as presented to me both when I was young and when I returned to it in my late 20s, the whole thing is a giant interlocking system of distinctions and divisions and the means through prayer and ritual, narrative and commentary of drawing them. The whole story begins with three mighty acts of division: day from night, heaven from earth, sea from land. After that, it's all boundaries and bright lines, from the bookended candle lightings of Shabbat to a woman's monthly mikveh, from circumcision to the bar mitzvah ceremony, from the 4 questions to the bedikat chametz, from the shearing of a bride's hair to the intricate string webs of an eruv. This night is not all those other nights. This is a woman, no longer a girl. We are not those people over there. Now, it's always been the business of religions all around the world to make and enforce distinctions between the sacred and profane, heaven and earth, gods and humans, clean and unclean, us and them. But in exilic Judaism, after the shattering of the priesthood, that business devolved uniquely onto the everyday shoulders of the ordinary Jew. In my novel, The Yiddish Policeman's Union, I invented a career and a character called a boundary maven, a man whose job is to create, map, and oversee the maintenance of the intersecting eruvim of my fictional Sitka, Alaska. But in fact, every Jew is, or is expected to become, a boundary maven. Every Jew's job is not just to see and understand, but to maintain, through constant vigilance and patrolling, to enforce, like a Yiddish policeman, the division between day and night, Sabbath and profane week, clean and unclean, child and adult, maiden and matron, Jew and Gentile, perfection and imperfection, modesty and vanity, indoors and out. And yet, despite my instinctive mistrust of wall building and boundary patrolling, and my reverence for miscegenation as the source of all human greatness, I went and married a Jew. We had 4 Jewish children and enrolled them in temple preschools. We taught them to value the things we found valuable in our culturally rich, if genetically somewhat impoverished, heritage. We made hamantaschen and latkes, lit candles, ransomed afikomens. When the children wrestled to understand the outrageous deeds of their mythic forebears, Abraham with his filicidal knife, say, or the endless massacres of innocents from the flood to Egypt to Shushan. When they asked tough questions like, why didn't God save all the animals? What did they do wrong? Or even, why is God so mean? I tried to teach them that this questioning, the very wrestling so hauntingly encoded in the story of Jacob and the messenger, was the most valuable part of their inheritance, the one they should never dishonor. I taught them what I knew about the names and characters of the various immigrant Jews whose genes they carried in jumbled bits and pieces, whose journeys to freedom, opportunity, and a ranch house in the suburbs of Philly, New York, or D.C. had made their lives possible. I said what could be said. It was not very much about the Jews who had been left behind, and taught my kids as much as they could handle about the genocidal power that had built its ghettos and enclosures drawn its lines of race and purity and Lebensraum, and othered all those aunts, uncles, and cousins into dust and ash. When they each turned 13, I sent my children reeling around an uproarious room, staggered by the astonishing heaviness of a Torah. And if you had asked me, when my 4 little Jews were young, if I hoped that they would marry in like their parents, grandparents, etc., I would have answered, if I was telling the truth, yes. There were so few of us, relatively speaking, in the world. If we did not want to see Jews and Judaism extinguished forever, like Manichaeanism or the African gray rhinoceros, somebody, like Doritos, was going to have to make more. In the 25 years since my Jewish wedding and the 23 since the birth of our first Yiddle, power around the world has gone on drawing its lines, enforcing its borders, building its walls and camps, patrolling its checkpoints, excluding and imprisoning and denying human beings their humanity. And all that time, as they always have, the world's religious traditions, my own shamefully among them, have served to justify, to give context to, and to prettify the dirty work. So in the early days of my return to Judaism, I used to try to draw a distinction of my own between that kind of religion and my kind, between the gods of hatred and the God of love. But at some point, I think it might have started with Baruch Goldstein. The comforting line I tried to draw between the nice kind of religion and the nasty began to waver. And then one day it just collapsed. It wasn't the worst thing that did the trick. Nobody died. But one day I saw video footage of some male Haredim in Jerusalem assaulting a group of young girls for the sin of daring to learn. All those pious gunnufs throwing rocks at little girls. And in my outrage and disgust, I found myself thinking, that's not Judaism. And then immediately afterwards, those are not Jews. Knowing, of course, that if one of those rock throwers dropped in for high holiday services at Chochmat Halev or Kehila, or one of the other Berkeley congregations where my family liked to worship, with the ouds skirling and women in taluses swirling deadhead style during the Hallelu, and all the language of patriarchy and triumphalism and exclusion reconfigured for maximum niceness, he would have used the same terms to divide himself from us. That is not Judaism. You are not Jews. That was the moment when I felt the toxin in the bloodstream, like on Game of Thrones, when Ser Jorah Mormont looks down at the skin of his forearm and sees the first dreaded pebblings of the disease called grayscale, and knows that it's only a matter of time before his flesh petrifies and his mind unravels. You should have cut off your arm the moment you were touched, the Archmaester at the Citadel will afterward inform Ser Jorah. The moment I found myself attempting to draw that exclusionary circle around my kind of Jews, some grave Archmaester in my heart made a similar prescription. Cut it away. I stopped lighting candles. I didn't bother with the Berikat Chometz. When the next high holidays rolled around, I stayed home. On Yom Kippur, I fasted, maybe because I wanted to show myself or my ancestors or the God I don't believe in that my non-participation was not a matter of indolence or physical weakness. Or maybe I just did it off saluchas, out of spite. Over the years that followed, my retreat from religious practice only deepened. And since we put the last of the B'nai Mitzvah behind us, it has become near total. And here we are, living in a world that feels so irredeemably addicted to the building of walls, to the architectures and economics of exclusion, to the violence that is the inevitable result of all those distinction-drawing ideologies of purity. Who's white? Who's a woman? Who's a Jew? That have always been humankind's most wrong-headed and dangerous vice. So now, today, at this retrograde and perilous moment in history, when ideologues are busily trying to string the world with aravim of intolerance, were you to ask me if I hope my children marry in? I would say, yes. I want them to marry into the tribe that prizes learning, inquiry, skepticism, openness to new ideas. I want my children to marry into the tribe that enshrines equality before the law and freedom of conscience and human rights. I want them to marry into the tribe that sees nations and borders as antiquated canards and ethnicity as a construct, prone, like all constructs, to endless reconfiguration. I still believe, even today, that this is the world's most populous tribe. There will be plenty of potential partners for my children to choose among. A fair number of those potential partners are even likely to be Jews. What if every Jewish parent thought that way? I can hear some of you saying to yourselves. What would happen to Judaism if all or even most of the world's Jews married out of Judaism? Judaism might disappear from the face of the earth forever. I don't believe that's ever going to happen. But let's say that it does. On the day that the last Jewish couple dies, after watching their children marry Hindus, Lutherans, atheists, Sunnis, Buddhists, the fault for that extinction will lie squarely with Judaism itself, and not because Judaism failed to enforce its teachings against intermarriage, but because it was necessary ever to have such teachings in the first place. Any religion that relies on compulsory endogamy to survive has, in my view, ceased to make the case for its continued validity in the everyday lives of human beings. If Judaism should ever pass from the world, it won't be the first time in history, far from it, that a great and ancient religion lost its hold on the moral imaginations of its adherents and its relevance to their lives. Nor will it be the first time that an ethnic minority has been absorbed, one exogamous marriage at a time, into the surrounding population. We will grieve that loss, you and I, if we're still around to witness it. But we probably won't be. And anyway, the history of the Jews, like the history of humanity and every individual human who has ever lived, is just one long story of grief, loss, and fading away. This year, we went to the home of my brother and his wife for the Passover Seder. She's a cantor, conservative training, Reform shul, and their home is a very Jewish place in a progressive East Bay kind of way. They keep kosher, in the house and out. They stay off phones and screens on Shabbat. Seders at my brother's house tend to be much more fun than the seders of our own childhood. They make ample room for children and their wrestling, and adults and their wrestling. And when it's time for Dayenu, we all beat each other up like the Yemenite Jews with scallions. I look forward to these seders. Even so, this year, there were moments during the service when I felt myself falling into the depressed mode that has tended to bedevil me at Passover in the years since I looked into my Jewish soul and saw the first stony blotch of grayscale. These Passover funks of mine tend to go through three stages. First, all the language of liberation and freedom that used to inspire me as a child with so much pride in the legacy of Jewish commitment to ending the misery of enslaved and oppressed peoples everywhere starts to sound self-aggrandizing and hollow as I think of my shame at the oppression I've witnessed, Jewish oppression, in Hebron, Susia, East Jerusalem. Then we get to the 10 plagues, locus of so much of my own childhood wrestling, and there's old Yahweh again, hardening Pharaoh's heart, ensuring the slaughter of thousands of innocent Egyptian boys, and I think, there's the God who wants you to throw rocks at little girls on their way to school. Then comes the final stage, where I remind myself that anyway, the whole Exodus story is all just a bunch of baloney. There's not a shred of evidence in the archaeological and historical record for any of it. The numbers and the dates don't add up, and the geography is funky, and the pyramids weren't even built by slave labor. It seems pretty clear that we just made the whole damn thing up. But this year, watching my 3 nephews and their first cousins reenact the 10 plagues with homemade paper hand puppets, I suddenly found myself thinking, what a weird thing for us to have done. When human beings have looked backward as a people to their remote ancestors, they've tended to see or to invent legacies of grandeur, mighty conquerors, demigods, and golden ages. What kind of people willingly devises for itself out of whole cloth a history of bitterness, inferiority, and subjugation? How different what we now call Judaism must have been before that strange invention, before we decided that we had once been slaves. And then I thought about other profound shifts in Jews' understanding of their own Judaism, when the God of some nomadic shepherds became the God of a kingdom of settled farmers, when the great temple rose in Jerusalem, when it was destroyed, and our history became a history of exile. With each of those shifts, old lines and boundaries were erased and new ones drawn. Every time upheaval and disaster threatened it, Judaism reinvented itself. It seemed to me then, sitting at my brother and sister-in-law's table, that Judaism had survived for so long not because of its famous tradition, but rather because of its mutability, its flexibility, its adherence capacity not just to behave, but to feel as though they have always been what they never were before. Hey, I thought, looking down the table at all those Jews of the future, that could happen again. And then I thought, it must happen again. Because in catastrophic times, the survival of Judaism was ensured not through standing pat, turning inward, or building walls, but through adaptation, moving outward, opening our minds to the ideas and our ears to the music and our mouths to the languages and our bellies to the kitchen wisdom of the people living on the other side of whatever boundary line we chose in our collective wisdom to ignore. This is my charge to you, class of 2018, Jewish leaders of the future. Knock down the walls. Abolish the checkpoints. Find room in the Jewish community for all those who want to share in our traditions. Inscribe the protective circle of your teachings around all those people whose very otherness demands that we honor our avowed commitments to peace and justice and loving kindness. Seize every opportunity to strengthen and enrich our cultural genome by embracing the inevitable variation and change that result from increased diversity. And let's say when, the Jews of the future find that under your leadership, they can no longer tolerate the occupation being undertaken in their name, when they have repudiated the purity tests and the separation barriers and all the rhetoric and instrumentalities of dehumanization, let it be because you have taught them to throw open the sanctuary gates of their own best ideas of themselves, and to make room at their tables and in their families and in their lands for all who are truly hungry, like the book says, to come and partake. Thank you.